Please feel free to take a seat. Thank you for joining us this morning at our speaker series here at Brisbane Powerhouse as part of Brisbane Open House Weekend 2024. I'm delighted to be, my name is Melissa Hurdle, I'm the Executive Director of Brisbane Open House, and I'd like to begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today, and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and extend that respect to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders peoples here today. So I'd like to thank our presenting partner, Merthyr Village. As any New Farm locals will know, that's very much the heart of New Farm. So they're our valued presenting partner for today. Our speaker series today encompasses the entire day. So we're starting this morning focused on New Farm and celebrating the New Farm and Districts Historical Society's 30-year anniversary this year. And then we've got several speaker sessions that will be here on the stage with a number of different architectural and historical speakers. It'll be a very interesting and robust conversation. We're concluding the day with Pecha Kucha with a number of different speakers. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Councillor Vicky Howard to officially open our speaker series today.
Well, thank you very much, Melissa, and it's a great delight to be here. Could I add my acknowledgement to the traditional custodians and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And as I look out over the audience, I can see many familiar faces, and it's fantastic that you are hosting the event here in our wonderful powerhouse. And I've just been sitting next to its architect, so you're going to hear from him later as well. But it is a really great delight to look at the speakers that you're going to hear today and to see so many familiar names. And I just wanted to show you this wonderful edition it's a special edition of the Brisbane Open House. You will all just have one like this. But if you want one like this, you'll be able to purchase one. So that's my ad. Christine Moody is the artist, and Christine is an amazing local who I often used to see at the Moray Cafe, and then the Moray closed down, and then she moved up the road to the next cafe. And she is the most amazing artist, and she's also on ABC Radio from time to time. So and I think that she's giving a talk at the library, but I think it's booked out. But I'm sure that you'll enjoy perhaps purchasing a limited edition of the wonderful booklet. I was in the city yesterday, and it is just amazing to see how many people are so interested in Open House. And I want to say a huge thank you to the directors and their partners and the ability to bring this together. Brisbane City Council has been involved with Open House for a very long time, but some of the way that it was set up has just changed recently, and so Melissa is doing a fantastic job of bringing all this together. What I think is fantastic this year, of course, is that it's that New Farm has a focus. It's about the village of New Farm, and all of us locals talk about I'm going to the village, which is Merthyr Village, and everybody knows where they're talking about. So it really is special that we live in a city such as Brisbane, which is a large city and growing daily, but to know that we have villages within our city where we can appreciate all of its history, all of the amazing architecture that we have here. And I see Gerard Benjamin is in the front row there, and Robert Allen, who I have done a pub crawl with, just saying. I met his parents in the lift. I did have to say there was no alcohol involved, but Robert and Gerard, of course, have been involved in the local New Farm Historical Society, and to have just celebrated its 30th year is just amazing. And I know that my predecessor, Mr. Hinchliffe, Councillor Hinchliffe, is going to be one of your speakers today, and David has done so much, particularly in Brisbane, for setting up historical societies, because he set up the one at Windsor that I was involved in when that was part of my jurisdiction, and I know how special the New Farm Historical Society is to him. When I attend those sessions, which we have about 100 people every time, and I see some people in the audience who are regular attendees, it is just fantastic that we can learn about our local history and to enjoy each other's company and to have those conversations where we share what we have learned. And just talking to Gerard, every time we go on a walk or we see someone, that they give us a little bit more history of our wonderful area. So I want to say a huge thank you to Open House for all of the work that they do to continue those conversations, to continue the fact that we have the most beautiful city in the world. We've been voted the happiest city, but I think that we are very blessed because, of course, in a few short years, in 8 years' time, we'll be hosting the Olympics and the Paralympics, and to put our city on display for the world is something extra special. But this morning you're going to have some amazing speakers, and I want to say a big thank you to everyone who's had anything to do with organising this, because I know how much organisation goes into it. But a thank you to Merthyr Village for sponsoring, and a thank you to all of the speakers that you're going to hear today, because I know their passion is going to make you passionate about the area, and I think I can now declare this officially open. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Vicky. Yeah, my name's Robert Allen. I'm involved with the local historical society, and I was very pleased to be asked by Melissa to be involved in helping run the speaker series here at this wonderful venue, which is one of the hubs of Open House this year. We're going to hear now from 4 speakers in the next hour or so, and without further ado, I'd like to start by introducing Gaja Kerry Charlton. Now, for those wondering, as I did initially, about the meaning of Gaja, it's a Yagara word which denotes eldership and seniority. I don't know is auntie a direct translation or is it a close translation?
It's probably a contemporary term in the spirit of what Gaja is traditionally to us.
Okay. So Gaja Kerry is a First Nations person, an elder, a traditional owner, and a culture and language custodian in 3 native title claims in southeast Queensland. I think they're listed here. That's right. Gaja Kerry researches and writes on Koori history, tribal knowledge, language and culture. In 2019, she authored an introduction to the languages of Moreton Bay. Her career has encompassed teaching, community building, writing, social justice and reconciliation. She's an industry fellow at UQ, and she's also part of Griffith Uni's Ancient Aboriginal DNA project, amongst other projects. Can you please join me in welcoming Gaja Kerry.
This is going to be fun, because I thought I was going in the middle of the others, so I could warm up, and but that's okay. That's all good, thank you. I'm used to this anyway, but, well, I'm used to speaking. So first of all, I'd like to say Numbali, Yowa, Marumba Berin, Nunyu Nubu Marumba. So greetings everyone, and good morning, and it's a great day, and Marumba Numbali, thank you for having me, everyone here. And I want to acknowledge each of you here, and I want to acknowledge Councillor Vicky as well, who's should be the pin-up girl for how lovely and happy, Brisbane is, because as I call it Mugginjin, and I've written about Mugginjin, but today I'm going to leave a lot of the new farm content to my colleague Ray, who's been doing it for a long time, and I'm going to speak from a Koori perspective in terms of just explaining some of Koori way and some storylines and songlines, and I'm going to show how I've taken it from oral history and also from records, and also then developed some what shall I say? My colleague, my elder colleagues, when I explain anything to them, there's one particular, he'll just say, "Can you put that in a matrix? I can't understand what you're saying. You're saying too much in one text." I get excited and I text them and say, "I've just found out what this means in the kinship, blah, 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 blah," and it's like, no, I need a matrix, I need an image. So what I now am is, I'm doing all these images. So with the, we are the Gurunpul, so just to introduce you, and definitely you'll know much more after with the slides. We are, through my bloodline, Quandamooka, we are part of the Chirangeri, Stradbroke Island. Most of you commonly know it by its historical name, Indirabar, which is a historical error by dear Archibald Meston. And he tried to fix it, but nobody would listen to him because it became a habit and it's still going. But those of us who come from the Morton family, or what was known as the Morton tribe, continue to call it Chirangeri, and others too. So we're teaching others, of course. And so on Stradbroke Island, we are Jandaval, and Jandaval is the tribe of somewhere called Gumpi. So who's been over Straddy? You all been over to Straddy? Yeah. So who knows where Gumpi is? No? Well. Yeah, well, when the flyer gets in, right, so Dunwich is Gumpi, the original name was Gumpi, which meant the big campsite for the Jandaval tribe, known as Jandai. You'd probably know it if you see, the elders have got a Jandai dictionary there. And that honours the Gumpi tribe. And then the other tribe I belong to is the Gurunpul, and that is the Amity Point, that the north end of the island. So you've got the north, central and south end. And so through my fellowship, I'm listening to the old audio taken of two of our grannies, Granny Janie Sunflower, Nee Morton, and grandfather Willie Mackenzie Gearbo, who was a Junabara Yundunbi Gubby Gubby man. So Granny Janie's mother was Gubby Gubby Yagara. Her grandfather was the Kerwali of Brisbane. And so when I was fortunate enough to be taught and hear them speaking up till I was about 10. And so when the second one passed away. So as you know, old audio can be pretty tricky to translate and listen to, and you've got to, listen to a word 500 times till you think you've got it, and then you can listen to it again 2 weeks later and think, oh, I don't think that's an N, I think that's an L. Go back and listen to it a bit longer. So it's a tedious in that I'm trying to translate the language that they sing in the songs to verify our sound system. But within the stories, there are beautiful stories from the area and why that song and dance is so important. So one of the ones that is quite near the area to do with the river, there's a number of them actually, and but in that is the story lines, our song lines, our protocols, our law, L-O-R-E, and law, L-A-W, and of course the valuable language, which I'm after. So the original names of place names are scattered throughout the recordings, and there's stories of the the explanation given to them. They give the language name and then they'll say, yes, the Bulimba Creek mob, and the Nyundanbi. So Nyundanbi was the Jundabari. Yundanbi is what Petrie called the Turrbal people of Torble Point. And Matthews writes, Reverend Matthews, who came out as a boy and went to Munumba Station, and that's when he first started learning the Cubby Cubby. And so he's written a lot about that, and he writes extensively about the Cubby Cubby, or Gubby Gubby. We say Gubby Gubby. Don't know whether it's just we're a bit south, so we pronounce guz more than the kuz, but it's the same thing. So he talks a lot about that as well. But so I'll get into it. I just want to introduce you to our Burriga Miri, our sea dog. And with everything, we're repatriating our knowledge systems and language and culture. And we've had this little visitor who comes up to the bay and spends some time on the rocks off Murumba, Point Lookout. We couldn't find a name for him. We could find the language words for all the other sea creatures, but not him. But so we had to decide, and it took about 3 years of working through a process where we now call him Burriga Miri. And Burriga is the original name of Moreton Bay, but it's also one of the names for the river from the top right down to meeting the mouth. So it's and there's a whole big storyline to do with that. So, but Burriga was also what Moreton Bay was called, and Miri is our name for dog. And so that's just a little interesting thing for you. He'd got injured at one point, and he had to spend quite a bit of time healing on a certain rock, which was quite secluded and isolated. And my colleague who lives at Point Lookout and is a great photographer and greenie helped with the photos, and he's my language colleague. So here's a little something I want to show you just for out of interest. You'll see that a lot of what I'm saying may be contrasting to what early literature says, and so that's the aim of my work, is correcting the Guri history and the Guri information and knowledges. So we can see we are in the best city because we're heart-shaped. Yagara is the heart-shaped little country there in southeast Queensland, and we are surrounded by 4 language countries, the Gubby Gubby, Jinnaburra and Waka Waka, and then Yugambeh, which is the top of northern Bundjalung, northernmost part of Bundjalung. Waka Waka and Jinnaburra is one of the tribes of Gure. And Gure, Ngure, or Nguro is the name of that area. That's the traditional name, but it does get shortened to Gure. And of course here we have Yagara and the Jandavel I spoke about. It's a tribe, Gumpi, Gua, of Morgumpen, Moreton Island. So I just wanted to make sure we all know where we're sitting. And I know that native title and historical documents are being interrogated all the time and helping us to distinguish and establish and confirm, but I'm giving you a lot of oral history from my grandparents, my grandfather particularly, and I'll introduce his father. But this is something that I've drawn up from over 30 years of research and oral history. So on the top is my great-grandfather, and he was the last message stick bearer of this Yagara country. And he actually mentored and took one of the grannies on the tapes through his ceremony. So Mookin, Charlie Morton, and he was the grandson of Kerwally of Brisbane. And so he spent considerable time with him before he died in 1900. So you can see that's his wife, Maminda, who was a West Yagara woman, Maminda meaning native daisy. Mookin, as you can see, meaning big and powerful and strong. They also did have fat, but I didn't think that was a very complimentary. And then I've put little things there that shows what some of the suffixes mean. So if you see ubar in a word, it means belonging to, particularly if it's a subject, you're using it for a name, the preceding word for a name, or bar. Does anybody know what bar means? No? Would you like to say? Do you know, Ray? Yep. Place of, yep. So you know Kapala Bar, place of possum, Pinken Bar, place of the water turkey, turtle. So Maminda, and so I'm just giving you that for an example. So Winyabar, that is the granny who's on the tape, and her parents, so Mukan and Winyabar were sister and brother. I'm a direct descendant of Mukan, and Granny Janie was his sister, youngest sister, and we were very close in the tribal sense. Dinaba, Sarah, was Kawali's daughter, and that's the mum of Mukan and Maminda. And then Dinaba married Dandraba, so Dinaba was from here, from this area, from Mugginjan, being the daughter of Kerwali, and Naywin being a Gubby woman or Nyundanbi woman, coming from that Nyundanbi Nambo through to the Pine River. Some of you will know them more commonly as Jundabari, if anybody's done any work in that area. So Dinaba and Dandraba, and you can see ironbark tree. So that's what I just wanted to explain. So Goonpool is the people of the pearl oyster shell. That's one of our pearl shells that we just love, the quampies. You'll hear us say quampies. We're going for quampies. That's particularly culturally spiritual significance when you go back down into anywhere in the bay, back into salt water. Chirangeri, the name of Stradbroke Island, and all the way down Kawali, Nuaju, who was brother of Dinaba, and then Juragai, the last king of, we think of Stradbroke Island. That's what my grandfathers have recorded him as. And so a lot of this has been oral history in terms of our kinship structure, our belonging to country, and I grew up with, we were raised with the grandparents in an extended family situation at 1 mile on Chirangeri, and also coastal Sandgate and mainland Brisbane, all around here. My childhood was around here a lot, South Brisbane, and then eventually we lived at Inala. So I won't say too much more, but what I want to emphasise is that our tribes and a lot of our areas are named after flora. This area was of course prolific in those trees, the tulip wood tree, muggan, the jandaru, ironbark tree, the Ullarin, the large grass trees. All of that is significant to the names of our tribes. That is cultural practice and custom. So when Watson writes Torable and Tora or stone, it's part of it's correct, but it is a Yugambeh word, and we are not named after stones. Our kinship connection is flora and fauna. So if I introduce myself to you, I will say I am Dandraba, I am Gurunpul, I'm Jandaval, I'm Mudjinbara, I'm Mugginjan, I'm Guri, which is what we call ourselves, Guri with a G, not a K. Go down south and where it gets colder you go to Guri. And I will tell you my Yuri, or my totem system, is Gabul, carpet snake, and my messenger bird is my Yuri. Yorn is you won't have heard this name, but it's Gunkum. 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 If I say it properly, Gunkum. So you'll hear something singing out in the night that makes a sound like that. So it's the mopoke, the frogmouth owl. And then I come from this area. So they are the three key things that come from our immediate kinship system, and your Yuri comes from your mother. So if there's a whole heap of females, you can see it track right back, and you can see it on this. So there's all the tribes, but then you'll see those Yuris repeating themselves, and that is what our ancient kinship system and eco-environmental management system is based on, and our spirituality and our philosophy. So why do we always dance totems in our dance? Because that's rejoicing the mother that's given us life, and then Mother Earth, Nabang Jara, who has, our 500-year strategic plan is to keep it pristine and healthy so that life lives, and the grandchildren's are living a healthy life. So this is Granny when she was younger, and that's her with the uncle on her right. They're the two on the tapes, and that's her older brother, my great-grandfather Mukin, and that's their grandfather with their mother standing next to him, Kawali, a dinner bar, and Nawan is sitting at the front. We've had, of course, the interruption of colonisation, and then the government administration through the reserve system and the Aboriginal Protection Act, and my great-grandfather and grandfathers, they couldn't take the exemption due to the clauses in the Act, because they were culturally brought up by Aboriginal people, and there was a clause that prohibited it. They needed more protection. And then, but the mission on Maiora was closing down, and they had a choice. You'll have to either take the exemption or go to Cherbourg. And they'd already been on 4 or 6 missions over 50 years, 60 years, so he was a free man, able to make his own decisions for 2 years before he died. So I just want to, that's us today. There's the book that we talked about, that you introduced. We were celebrating. I just wanted to show that oral history and writing it and correcting history is happening. These are all the tribes we've identified and are confirming. And thank you for listening.
Wow, it's a lot to take in, isn't it? Thanks very much, Gaja Kerry. Dr. Ray Kerkhove is an adjunct associate professor at the University of Southern Queensland School of Education. He's also an associate with the Australian Centre for Genocide Studies and a research historian affiliated with the Aboriginal Environments Research Centre and the UQ's School of Social Sciences Archaeology Department. Ray began working with Australian First Nations community in 1985 as a researcher with FAIRA, Foundation for Aboriginal and Islander Researcher Action, which was run and staffed by First Nations people. In 2007, he established Interactive Community Planning Australia for the presentation of Indigenous heritage and cultural revitalisation. He's been a co-recipient of the Helen Taylor Award for Local History. He's been twice a visiting fellow with Griffith Uni and a historian in residence with both the Noosa Council and the Sunshine Coast Council. He's authored dozens of journal articles, chapters and books on Indigenous history and more than 80 heritage reports. One of his key interests is reconstructing Indigenous site histories around southeast Queensland, and in that capacity he wrote Aboriginal Campsites of Greater Brisbane. I think that's where I first came across your work, Ray. It's a fantastic resource. And a little plug, we've got books from our speakers available after the session out on the River Terrace. Okay. Ray's main maps have been used by the Museum of Brisbane and the State Library, and his research work has informed town plans and artworks and education resources and major projects. Please join me in welcoming Ray Kerkhove.
Thank you. And I'm going to flash through a whole lot of images and maps because otherwise it's boring just listening to me. And I'll probably get Gaja to sort of say a bit in between too. So I love this image because it actually gives you sort of an idea about where we are. If you can see, it's all flat and there's little ponds there. That's a sketch. And that's because it was a place of many little ponds. Binkumba, how do you say that rightly? Is that good?
It doesn't matter.
Right. That was the name for this area, which has been moved to Pinkenba by error. It wasn't supposed to be there. And it's this particular tortoise, which you can still see all over Moreton, the Moreton region. It's a little Bardell tortoise. There's stories, there's myths about it being like a warrior I've read, but that's further north. I don't know about down here. And that was caught, as it mentioned there, by nets or by hand. There was a lot of netting and fishing in this area, so I've taken these images to show you the kind of sort of culture. So this is just going to basically reconstruct how things looked around here before settlement. And I love this map because it shows a lot of those little swamps and sort of flat areas that used to be around, the creeks. I've got a whole series of these, so I'm just going to flash through them. But these early maps really give you a bit of an idea of what used to be here. In terms of the lowlands, there was a lot of flats, you can imagine. I like this one too because it also shows the little valleys where they had waterholes coming into what's now New Farm. And basically, if you look at the early literature, it basically says this, and I've taken these images, obviously they're not New Farm, but this is areas, other parts of Australia that kind of give you an idea. There used to be clumps of, or groves of tea tree. There was some open woodland in some places, particularly towards Tenerife. A lot of sort of flat marshy areas like I've got here, and also a sort of grassy sort of bank. And these are some of the resources that are mentioned in early sources. A lot of wild waterfowl, a lot of red-bellied black snakes, which you can't eat, but eels get mentioned a lot as they lived in the waterholes. Now the thing that grows under a lot of the tea tree is bungwall fern, which is an important food. So they would have come here for that, obviously to grind it, and that was a major staple. It was sort of like breads were made out of that. The other thing was a lot of reeds. This is an image, obviously, of Eagle Farm flats, but the reason I've got that there is to show you the kind of stuff that grew, and that would have been a lot of women's work coming in and making baskets like these ones. So this is all around southeast Queensland. In fact, Gaja would recognise some of these from there. A lot of these are. So this is just, I did a sketch map, but just to show where different things were. I actually gave a talk to you guys almost 10 years ago, but not here, the other at your other place. So Tummerman is the area that's now called Petrie's Bight, and that area had a lot of wattle and casuarina groves, according to Oxley when he went there. And oh, hello, I see a few people I know. But above there was open woodland, and there were also patches of vine forest down sort of towards the southeast corner. That's my going on about that. There's burials found at Tenerife. You probably know that because it's mentioned in one of your books. And there was this. You probably know the art site, which is honouring this oyster midden. I haven't been able to find a lot more about it, except that I do know this is what the lime burning kilns looked like, and that was. They often used the middens all around Brisbane River. There used to be oyster banks all along the Brisbane River. They're extinct in most places, but a lot of the mortar for making like the cement between bricks all over Brisbane and even the road base was made out of middens. They basically mined the middens. There used to be huge middens that stretched at some places like 40 kilometres. They were big hills. Very little of that is left because they were basically used as free road base to sort of burn down and make into lime. And there was one of these was at Petrie's Bight. Oh, give me a tea when I'm too far. I like this painting from Conrad Martins because he's actually done it from New Farm looking to Kangaroo Point, and it shows, it's the only one I know that actually shows the little bit of rainforest that used to exist, you know? And this is some mapping that we've been doing with UQ, but it's not accurate, you know, as Gaja just pointed out some errors already, but it's a start. We've got to start somewhere. At least in this you can see the rainforest patches, and there was a campsite at what's now the gasworks, you know, that area, and obviously there was one at Ivory Street, which is at what do you call it, Petrie's Bight. So this is another one actually this is a project with Gaja about for All Hallows School, and this shows kind of roughly where some of the camps and that were. The other thing that's important is that there was a very big base camp on the other side, so just out on the other side of the river there, where Norman Creek comes out, you know, which is now east Brisbane, and yeah, anyway, you know what I mean. Okay, and that actually had a big fishery. So when I say a fishery, I'm talking about like proper fish traps and things, and from that they used to supply Brisbane. But the other thing is that they were often recorded as crossing over the river, back and forward to where we are now, New Farm. And that was probably, what have I done wrong? I've hit the wrong button. Okay, yep. That was done by swimming, but also by canoes, and this is what the canoes of this area looked like. That picture there is actually from Harvey Bay, but it shows how they looked. This is reconstructions done with, it was a project I was involved with the Gubby Gubby. They were usually from the swamp mahogany, this tree up here. This is a sketch from Pettigrew. He drew very badly, so you can hardly tell what it was. Yep.
Can I just say that there was a bronze canoe at Tennessee, if anyone's been out that way, up there, just on the corner of Oxley Creek and Brisbane. And that was done 97 in a traditional cultural way, and actually launched and floated. And so if anybody's driving through there,
and it looks a bit like that thing too, by the way. It's yeah. I keep hitting the wrong button. Sorry, guys. Okay, on the other side, moving up, down the river a bit, Bulimba was full of little camps. And that's actually an image. There's a photo that this actually came from the Bulimba Historic, Balmoral Historic Society, whatever they call themselves. So we have very few of this area. That's the kind of closest I can get. We don't really know who those people are. That was actually where the Bulimba barracks used to be. Oh, I keep hitting the wrong button. Okay, so this is Newstead. So I'm just moving down the river a little bit. And you can see how bushy it used to be around there. Another early map. The reason I'm bringing this up is because where the creek met the river, we know they had shipworm farms, and these were basically where they pile up a whole lot of logs and let them rot to get these shipworms, which are quite delicious. No, really, apparently, yeah. A lot of settlers said when they tasted, they were surprised how yummy these are, but we don't seem to eat them now. I don't know. So that's breakfast. Yeah, there you go. That's Breakfast Creek as it used to look. So you can see it hasn't changed too much, except it's 100% more polluted now. But the thing to notice there is a lot of she oaks used to grow along the creeks. You can understand why then, because she oak was one of the main trees they used for the shipworm farms. And there was a big fishery up where the Abbotsford Road bridge crosses. And we've got a lot of accounts of this, which is very interesting, that the settlers said that this was the main supply of fish for Brisbane at the time. It was a quite complex, a lot of fish traps. Unfortunately, none of it survives. It was like stakes and little fences and things where First Nations people not only got enough for themselves, but had also a lot extra which they then traded or sold in town. And the other thing to notice is you'll see this is a very early map, and it shows what's now the Kingsford Swift Drive. And that was a pathway, as far as we can work out, that's very ancient, and that's a lot of work that Gaja and myself were involved with this book. The Women of Brisbane, which goes on about the sort of stuff that's around the Kingsford Drive area. That's a book that was done by Judy Watson. So you can see it in these early paintings and photos that actually there's nowhere else to go because you've got the hills coming right down and then you've got a little flat area. So you can see why that became the pathway and then the road, because it's sort of like, well, where else can you go? So there was a whole cluster of little camps in that area, which is now what you'd say, well, Albion, Hamilton Way. Oh, I keep hitting the wrong one, sorry guys. That's sort of the views I took from there to give you an idea of where those camps were. I'll very quickly get into the historical aspects because you probably want to know that. In convict times, this area was New Farm, obviously. It was one of the farms that was actually supplying the convict settlement of Brisbane. So each of these smudges that I've got here is a farm that was actually supplying Brisbane. And what happened in this time was that First Nations people obviously got wind of this and decided to starve out the colony. And they did a damn good job of it because Captain Logan actually had to send soldiers over here, and there was some sort of massacre, we don't even know it, probably what's now Wollongabba. And each of these little dots that I've got there is marking what they call the crow minder's hut. There was a hut that was set to watch over the fields of the crops, because the First Nations warriors would come in and actually just burn the lot, you know. And this was actually quite successful for a while. They were actually worried and waiting for the supply ships to help them out. So there was an ongoing sort of stuff there, and it's terrible because these crow miners would shoot at Aboriginal people trying to burn or you know, invade the crops. The other interesting thing is the whole story about the regattas that were up and down around here where we are now, because the first one was in 1848 and was actually won by Aboriginal people, and it was, and they decided to have the regatta to celebrate the fact there had been 25 years of successful settlement, and they thought, oh, as a bit of goodwill, we'll invite the people. There were a lot of Straddie people actually, because they were the rowers. But what they found is they actually won. And the interesting thing is the vessel that they used, it was one of these things. It was a whaleboat, and they'd actually gotten the whaleboat for helping out the survivors. They actually helped out shipwreck survivors a lot, actually, not just one, but they got this one for the Sovereign, and they actually called the ship Pirate. And they actually had a pirate's flag on it, which I think just the thought behind this is so clever, you know. And they won, but they also won the second place. And in fact, they won every bloody race. So after a while, there was an outcry, and the settlers said, "Look, you know, this isn't fair. They're professionals, and we're not." So then they started to have a separate, you know, events for Aboriginal people to do the boating and them, you know, just crazy. And that went on for years.
And they stopped paying prize money.
Yeah, I know. It's terrible. Yeah, they gave prize money for any whites, but the Aboriginal people, yeah, there you go. Now, obviously, things did get violent. This is a petition I dug up that was actually from the first settlers of Breakfast Creek, and they all wanted police protection. And this is a rifle that in the archaeology work, you know, when they were doing this, Gaja, they actually found this thing in sort of where Hamilton Wharf is. There's a car park there, and I actually had a look at it, and I thought, no, they didn't know what it was. And I got a friend of mine who does military history, and he worked out what it was. It's this thing. It's a Sharps carbine, and that was a major gun that was often used on the frontier, and it was found right in the camp. So that for me says something. We don't know what happened there, but we do know that, as I've got here in this, that all these little camps were destroyed several times, 7 times over. And the interesting thing is that the First Nations people, I'm sorry, I never pronounced the word right. Guri. The Guri people kept coming back. They kept, even though these were destroyed by the police, they burnt down the camps, they chucked everything out, they'd come back and build them again and again, 7 times over. A lot of stories of that. And I think you have to look at Newstead House differently because of that, because it was basically a policing spot, and it was almost like a borderline. I've written about this. This these are some of the incidents. They're all actually in the newspapers, they're historically recorded. So that's what I find so fascinating, that this will happen and it's right here and we don't even notice it. Some people died, there was sort of back and forth. Sometimes there was success by Aboriginal people. And after that you had the introduction of the boundary streets. You can see this one runs right through where we are. This is the later, in 1842 it was smaller and then they grew it out here. And these yellow areas I've got are where we know Guri camps were. So it's interesting, you can see how they've done it sort of up to, and then the idea was to exclude Aboriginal people after dark and also on weekends, to these areas outside. And so I'm going to end on this one, which is your ancestor here. Just thought some interesting stuff on this, because this is a painting that's now lost, but I found it in a newspaper. But I'm pretty sure it's, by the look of it, that it's Breakfast Creek. But we know that Kowali and his wife were actually in this area quite a bit, because Catch Penny gets mentioned, that's the earlier, or the later, was it? We've tried to... The first year.
And so she was around till about, definitely after Craig, this is in 1875. But in the 1880s, somewhere.
Guam, isn't it the name? Guam, yeah. Guam, yeah, so, yeah. So, but we know because she used to do like skits and things at the Ascot races, so she came through this way all the time, and she'd get a lot of pennies. That's how she got the name. And she'd actually catch penny, and ruined her mouth doing this. But it wasn't the only thing she did. I thought it's interesting too that in the State Library you've still got this medallion which has got Kowali, King Sandy's image on it. It says on there, Sandy X Rex. And the story of that was minted 1875 when the first Eka was declared. And they did a similar thing to each of the colonies, decided to have this exhibition. And they each did the thing, minting a coin, basically deposing the headman of the area with different, so there's different ones. There was one for Sydney, there was one done in Hobart. So I find it very interesting, because it also basically states that they recognise the authority of Kowali because they stuck it on a medallion. You can see the thing in the State Library. It's tiny, but I think it's very interesting. Anyway, so the presence continued, and that's it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ray. I'm learning a lot. I hope you're learning a lot too. Gerard's been mentioned once or twice already in dispatches this morning. Gerard's well known around the New Farm Peninsula as a wordsmith, a skilled interviewer, a publisher, and basically a walking encyclopedia on this area's history. He's a regular columnist to the Village Voice magazine and the author of several best-selling books about New Farm history, including his most recent New Farm 50 Stories, copies of which are available on the River Terrace here today. He might even sign them if you ask him nicely. Gerard also leads guided history walks in and around New Farm, including as recently as yesterday, as part of this year's Brisbane Open House program. I think I can also say without fear of contradiction that Gerard is the only one here today who's had a large metal sheep sculpture named after him. I'll leave him to tell you that story, but if he's too modest, ask me afterwards and I'll fill you in. Please welcome Gerard Benjamin.
Thank you, Robert. Good morning, everybody. I had a walk yesterday with about 25 people, and one of the women said she lived in 4 different locations in New Farm as a young woman. She said when she lived in Casa del Rio in Moray Street, she and 5 other girls lived in one flat. There were 6 flats in the building. Each flat had 6 girls in them. So 1 bathroom, 6 girls. So she said that she had the time of her life. I said, here's my email address, write me 2 pages about what New Farm was like in those days. So that's my approach, to find out as much as I can about life in New Farm. So I'll pick up the story now. For the white settlement in New Farm, Governor Captain Logan between 1826 and 1829, the convict prisoner numbers rose from 200 to 1,000, so it was obviously on his mind to find somewhere to produce more wheat and maize. So hence he turned to the New Farm area, even though it would need convict labour to trek 3 kilometres each way from Queen Street. Tom Petrie, in his reminiscences of early Queensland, said, "I have seen the poor fellows march with chains on their legs to their work at New Farm and back again. On each cultivated part, when the corn was in cob, a prisoner was put to keep away the crows and the cockatoos, and he was dubbed the crow minder, and he had a clapper to make a noise to frighten the birds. And the crow minder at New Farm had a tree and hut, and it stood on the riverbank near where the residence of Sir Samuel Griffith now stands." So we'll come to him in a minute. And Ray pointed out where that crow minder was. There you are, yeah. I haven't been able to find any surviving evidence of convict activity in New Farm. Margaret Gilmore and her sister Florence, who later married Joe Bjelke-Petersen, they grew up in Mark Street near Merthyr Road, and they were told as children to keep away from the convict well, which had a cap on it, just over the fence. And if we correlate, it would probably be about that drain there, that line there, is where Mark Street would be. An elderly priest whom I interviewed 16 years ago about his childhood in New Farm told me, "We were only a couple of doors from the corner of Wellesby Street. In our day, there were no houses on the block from Wellesby to Sydney Street. And when they were building the houses, I heard that they were finding leg irons and handcuffs. I don't think they found them in abundance." Now, once the convict settlement ceased and Moreton Bay was opened up to free settlement, the names of early landholders in the New Farm area included people such as John McConnell, Thomas Adams, William Kent, James Gibbon, Daniel Skyring, George Raff, Robert Little. So you'll recognise some street names from those people. These included professional men doing business in town, merchants and ship owners, and western or northern pastoralists desiring a house in town. Early roads were rudimentary. The so-called government road to the New Farm became known as Brunswick Street by 1851, and the road we know as Merthyr Road was called Racecourse Road because at its eastern end was a course dating from 1846 where the Moreton Bay Jockey Club held meetings. And here's a couple of notices from 1847. Generally the race meeting was 3 days long. People would walk from town or they could take the boat. Sometimes the boat had a band on it, and people came from Ipswich or further away. And here's a report from a race. Mr. G. Leslie's Creeping Jenny was number 1, and Mr. Mackenzie's Cock Robin came number 2. Now, who is Mr. G. Leslie? He is George Leslie, brother of Patrick Leslie, and you'll know that he was one of the founders of, an early settler in the Darling Downs. And in 1847, 2 years before, he'd built a little cottage which he called Newstead, and in 1847 he had sold Newstead House to his brother-in-law John Wickham. Mr. Mackenzie, he had a house in Turner Avenue known as Canallan, and in 1847 he'd been married for 1 year to a daughter of Richard Jones, and we'll come to him in a minute. The early settlers, the idea was to build on higher ground. That was the luxury of those who came first. In the 1850s, Robert Cribb was living at Kingsholm. Also at this time, a cottage on Brunswick Street for a Mr. Abraham. He was a legal officer, later became Weinberg. Mrs. Mackenzie, the new Mrs. Mackenzie, was wanting a cook for her home Canallan in Turner Avenue in 1858. Solicitor Daniel Roberts built Ravenswood on Bowen Terrace in 1860. At about the time, George Raff built Moray Bank, this house, which was near today's Moray Cafe. Of the 120 acres bought by James Gibbon, the top of the hill was the ideal spot for his Tenerife house, in 1865, and banker Edward Drury built Horsestead on Bowen Terrace in 1875. Now, if we headed down Merthyr Road and turned left into Moray Street and went about 100 yards and looked down towards the river, that's where we would have found a sort of a simple homestead, which in 1847 was the house of Richard Jones. He had been a leading public figure in Sydney with his pastoral business and maritime interests. He was known as Merchant Jones, and later China Jones when he imported tea from China. With the depression of the early 1840s in Sydney, he went insolvent, came north to Queensland to see what opportunities of taking up pastoral land would offer, and here he lived from 1844 with his family. He took up 100 acres in the vicinity of Merthyr Road, and this modest cottage is how it was sketched by Conrad Martins in 1851. And this sketch was kept by Richard Jones's youngest daughter, Frances, and incidentally, Conrad Martins was on the Beagle with Charles Darwin, and his fellow shipmate was John Wickham. So these all people knew each other. Many years later, the daughter recorded these notes. My father died in 1852. In those primitive days, there were no hearses. The body was brought in on a rowing boat from New Farm to the South Brisbane Ferry, where the Victoria Bridge now stands, and from here it was carried in relays of men to the Milton Cemetery. It's noteworthy that Richard Jones figures prominently in the recent family chronicle by David Marr entitled Killing for Country. Now, more than 20 years after the death of Mr. Jones, this particular piece of land was acquired by a young barrister named Samuel Griffith, who built a substantial house in 1880. Named for his Welsh birthplace, Merthyr had a grand riverfront position, was lavishly furnished and decorated, and included a high-ceilinged ballroom at its centre, which was ideal for official and social engagements. Old-timers in New Farm remember church and school fetes being held in the extensive grounds. Sir Samuel Griffith was twice Premier of Queensland. He served as Chief Justice, was the inaugural Chief Justice of Australia, and played a pivotal role in writing the Australian Constitution. So he would probably be the most prominent citizen in New Farm. Years ago, I happened to say hello to Senator George Brandis, who was electioneering on the corner of Brunswick and Merthyr, and he asked me, now on a point of history, can you tell me where is Merthyr, the house of Sir Samuel Griffith? He was utterly dismayed to learn that it had been demolished in the 1960s. Now, by the 1880s, many of these large estates were being sold as subdivisions. For instance, in 1885, this portion of Kingsholm Estate, amounting to 264 allotments, went on the market. And this is, so these are the streets, James Street, Hawthorn, Kingsholm, the old Racecourse Road, Merthyr Road. And so this is one of the houses built on James Street, and this belonged to the Garnett family. And in terms of the New Farm Historical Society turning 30, Ross Garnett, one of the descendants of the Garnett family, he has been 17 years president, and he's been succeeded as by his wife Desley. So the Garnetts have been around for a long time too. With all of this kind of building activity, it was no wonder that merchant Nehemiah Bartley, in a letter to the editor in 1884, pointed out that there was not 1 square inch of public land reserved for health, air, shade and recreation for the growing population of Fortitude Valley, Tenerife and New Farm. So in suggesting that the government buy 30 to 40 acres of riverfront land and plant it with shade trees, he was prefiguring the locality's iconic centrepiece, which did not arrive until 1913. In terms of industry, a brewery, later known as the Bulimba Brewery, had been established on the riverfront at Florence, adjacent to Florence Street, and there was even a talk of a high-level bridge across to Bulimba. And right beside today's Tenerife Ferry, the Dath, Henderson and Co sawmill was a prosperous enterprise with 40,000 tonnes of timber being brought annually in its own vessel from the Noosa River. And then, of course, in 1893, the CSR refinery was established on land which had once been adjacent to the old racecourse. Who will remember the man with the flag and the whistle or the bell on Breakfast Creek Road trying to negotiate trains across? And here's a train in Grey Street behind the CSR refinery. Sometimes there were passenger trains taking excursions. In terms of trams, in 1883, horse trams came to New Farm. They were electrified not long after, and in 1914 there was a service, the New Farm service was extended via Barker Street, Moray Street towards Merthyr Road. The Queen's Arms Hotel dated from 1883, and the Brunswick Hotel has the date 1889 on it, but there had been an earlier establishment there from the 1860s. New Farm State School, it opened in 1901. They expected 332 pupils, and on the first day, 582 appeared. 2 days later, that climbed to 621. So the headmaster felt compelled to ask the department for more furniture and permission to hold classes under the school. The stories of overcrowding at New Farm State School became legendary. And finally, this is a view from 1904, which nicely combines the bucolic nature of New Farm with the arrival of industry in the form of the CSR sugar refinery. This little shop here is on the corner of Merthyr and Brunswick Street. And in the 1920s, a lady named Mrs. Jessie Gill, she ran the shop. She had a daughter who had a pet koala, which was the key attraction to all the children who arrived at the shop. And on that note, I will thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Gerard. It's a nice segue, a neat segue for our next speaker. Is Peter here? Where has he gone? Oh, he's right here. Sorry, I was looking at the front row. Where's he gone? Peter Roy is a retired architect who spent much of his career working on theatres in Nottingham, London, Sydney, Auckland, Canberra, and here in Brisbane. He headed up the Brisbane City Council's architectural design section between 1991 and 2001. And he led the multidisciplinary design team on the redevelopment of the Brisbane Powerhouse between 1997 and 2001. And he's also been involved in other powerhouse projects up until 2015. Peter is a Life Fellow of the Australian Institute of Architects, which is obviously a singular honour bestowed by his peers. And given this year's focus of Brisbane Open House on this amazing performance art space, it's entirely appropriate we hear today from the person who, more than any other individual, helped bring about his existence. Please join me in welcoming Peter Roy.
Thanks. So there is a rumour about that I walk like this because Jim Sawley, the mayor at the time, kicked me up the backside for going over the budget. It's not true. I knew he was going to kick me up the backside, and I got a file down the back of my pants first. So there we go. It's just age. Okay. Oh, we're already starting. It's right. Yeah. Well, Robert said I had more to do with anybody, but actually Trevor Eddercliffe was the key man on this whole show, and we were lucky enough to be involved in it. It's a great project to be involved. And there was a big group of us, probably about 50 all up, of which I was one. So that gives me like 2% of the credit. But because I led the team, I get 100% of the credit. That's just the way it works. Okay.
Can you use the... I'll put the mic out a bit further. You can stay where you are, but I'll extend it.
All right. I've got this thing here. All right.
So I'm screwing the right one. There we go. That might get a bit closer.
When I was at the launch of the open house, people asked me two questions. How come the powerhouse is here, and how do you set about designing it? So that's what I'll answer today, really briefly. And I've been waffling along already, so it's even more brief. This is the picture that we had in the studio to inspire us on and keep us on track. And this is why the question comes up, why is the powerhouse here? Right in the middle of a lovely rose garden, right in the middle of a suburb like this. I've no idea why this site was chosen, but in 1924, City Council came together as a greater City Council, and they built 3 projects. City Hall, which was finished in about 1930, Grey Street Bridge, which was finished in about 1932, and the first stage of the powerhouse, which was commissioned in about 1928. And it was there to provide electricity for the trams, but also later on provided electricity for the new suburbs of Toowong and Yirrongapilly and Ithaca, which were new in those days anyway. This is a nice view of it there, coal coming off the river, up this conveyor belt and into the big building, which is the boiler house, which doesn't exist anymore there, and a lovely little building in the front by the assistant architect at the time, a guy called Frank Costello, who we love for all of his little transformer buildings around town. And that's why the question comes, why on earth are you building this thing in the middle of a lovely space like this here? You know, and that's what happens. At the opening of the building, a lady came up to me and she said, I used to live here, I used to have to wash my kids every night when they came in because of the soot that was all over them here. And we're hopefully a little bit greener nowadays, but that's what it looked like. And that's a better picture for the climate deniers. Just a little wisp of smoke coming out of there, but you can see the big building there in the middle, and that's the boiler room where all the damage was done. And on the left-hand side is the turbine room, which we're sitting in now. So turbine house, yeah. So here we go. This is another picture of the turbine room with the turbines in there, and man hard at work. And there. We don't quite see, just up the top right-hand corner, there's the crane which used to lift the turbines out when they were needed to be mended and moved along, and you can still see part of it working in there. Now there's a bit of a rig, we'll see a bit later. Sadly, after the Second World War, the council introduced buses and thought they were a bit more efficient, certainly more flexible than the trams, and the trams were discontinued in 1969, and of course the powerhouse was decommissioned shortly thereafter, and Swanbank outside Ipswich came into, it was commissioned in the early 70s, and that was really a better place to have it, miles away from populations. I put this picture in here because this is the switch room, and I am standing where the desk is. So this is what the room used to look like. The chief engineer would be sitting there where the councillor is there at the moment, and I'm part of the equipment up here there, ready to get switched on and off. You can switch me off when you like, yeah. And there's a picture. This is what it was like when we turned up as designers on the building, and you can see the boiler house is gone, but the turbine rooms are still there, and that was the view. 1984, the SEQEB collapsed. They'd taken all this good stuff out of the building, and they collapsed the boiler house in on itself, and then they just used the room that was left over the top of the rubble to dump all their stuff from sites around Brisbane. And so when you walk out there on the plaza, you're standing on a load of junk, toxic junk, but junk, you know, really bad junk. So that's what we inherited, fence around the place, and it looked pretty dreadful. It had come into disrepair, a lot of things there. In 1994, there was a gig here that UQ set up called Translucent, and that was a funny little crane. That crane was sitting on the wharf outside here. The Sunday papers came out and said, the building's going to get redone. There's going to be a revamping of the building. Monday morning, it was gone. Somebody got it, took it away. Yeah. Anyway, the gig was in this place, and you can see how dangerous it was. That's me and Chris Bowen standing there talking about what might happen. It was done at night time, completely black, fire in the place, water in the place, grog in the place, drugs in the place, rock and roll in the place, and everything else that goes with it. Nobody apparently was injured. It's a bit of a miracle, really. That's downstairs. That's the inside the Fairfax studio now, and the foyer of the Underground Theatre there. And inside the Powerhouse Theatre, that piece of graffiti done by the students at Griffith Uni is hidden mainly behind curtains, but that's where the stage of the Powerhouse is. So that was a very quick, brief history of how the building came here. And how do we set about designing it? It was the governor that asked me, how do you set about designing this thing here? Since we're mainly not architects here, I thought I would just go through it. So what you look at first is that I'm going to read from there. It's who and what. Who and what are you designing for? So who are we designing for? We're designing for patrons, people that come in, spend money, buy a ticket. They want to see something, they want to hear it, they want to get up at the interval, they want to have a drink, they want to go to the toilet, they want to meet their friends. So that's one layer of people there. The other layer is the community. It's a Brisbane City Council building, so the community own it, right? Everybody has to be welcome in this place here, and we have to get the community to own the building and love the building, which I hope that they do there. Another lot of people is the performers, of course, and what we have to do as designers is make sure that the performers, who are artists and creative people, have a facility where they can show off their art and their creativity as best as they can. The technical staff in this place here, they are the key people in this place. They keep everybody safe. They make sure that the building can adapt itself to the new performers that come in to places like this here when we're putting on a little gig like this here. But they're the ones, you give them enough light, enough power, enough spots to hang lights, hang things down, move scenery around, move the place backwards and forwards, and they can do absolutely everything. The artistic direction, of course, this place puts on 700 shows a year. So somebody has to actually make sure that these shows are going to be the types of shows that you guys are all going to turn up and stick your hand in your pocket and pay money for. So that's a big job. So we have to make sure that they can do their job. And of course, the last one is the promoters, the guys that actually put on the shows, put their money in their pocket. They want to make sure that they get their money back. So you have to think about all of these people while they're doing it there. But we're architects, of course, so we get a whole lot of fancy ideas too. And that first picture was about the industrial aesthetic. That was a picture that I grabbed of Neil Armfield directing a show in a warehouse in Melbourne, and it had a big piece of industrial junk in there, and that's what we thought, right, we keep the industrial aesthetic going through on this place here. We keep the graffiti, it's all around there, and we don't say that that piece is better than that piece is better than that piece. It all has the same value, and so we looked after all of it. When people scribbled on the wall later on, we looked after that. When surveyors put a nail in the wall, we looked after that. So in terms of heritage, we touched the building lightly and we changed as little as possible. That was the idea of it there. So we come back to it. Obviously, bits got changed, and unless you see the original photographs, you don't think that a lot of it has been changed, but we did change it there. And we had a couple of now of architectural ideas. And one was about put in a building inside a building, like a series of Russian dolls where they just keep piling inside there. Churches in London were bombed during the war. A lot of them were not built, but they just put another church inside it where they could run the thing. So that was one of our ideas, put a building inside a building. Another one came from a great architectural writer called Colin Rowe, who said that Corbusier took his Unité d'Habitation and slipped it into the courtyard of the Uffizi Gallery in Florence. And he described that as putting a boat into a dry dock. You slip it in, but you don't touch the sides. And that was our idea. Touch it lightly. Don't mess around with the existing building. Make sure that our building respects it all there. And you've got to think about future adaptability. This place changes all the time, and the artistic directors come and go, and they want to do things differently. So next thing that we look at as architects is precedent. And so we're looking at some precedent. There's my first picture of Neil Armfield, and that's it there. There's a big piece of industrial junk. Poor guy up in there is looking a bit worried, and I don't blame him really. But here's our idea we looked at. This is a spaceship. It's gone into Manchester Stock Exchange. They took this lovely old building and they built a shed down the road and said, well, we're going to run the Stock Exchange down from there. What do we do with this building? So these guys built the spaceship in here. I think we just landed on the moon there, so it was a good idea at the time there. But we took that idea back of our heads on there, and about the flexibility. This is from the Cottesloe in London, and you can't see the things there, but the seats move around, the floors move up and down, and you can put lots of different shows in there because you've got a bit of flexibility about the things like that. Plenty of places to hang lights and scenery. The thing that performers like is they like a level of intimacy about things. They like to feel that they're part of the audience and the audience is part of them. So we looked at a couple of things where the people were really very close to the audience. And how do you stick an old building on there? Well, this was the Young Vic, and it's where where the actors get taught to be actors, and that's called confrontation. That's their end of year performance. This is where they're going to graduate or not graduate, and that was our idea for the little theatre downstairs. Could it be confrontational? But there's a softness about this building too, and that's related to its beautiful brickwork. And the brickwork is tough old brickwork. It had to be to stand up to this thing here. But all the joints kind of fall out. The mortar falls out of the joints, and so you get this really nice edges to the sound, which breaks the sound up, and you get a very nice acoustic. And this building here has got ribs on the top as well, so you get a nice noise out of the building. And if you go into the small theatre, it's got ribs, which are the stairs from outside. When you walk up onto the turbine platform, the stairs are echoed down below. This is a rather bad idea of community. How do you get the community? This is the Edinburgh Festival Theatre. In Scotland, if you want to get the community, where I was brought up, if you want to get the community involved, you put a bar on every level of the thing there. The population of Edinburgh would flock in there, and the community, that's time up, was there. That's not the way we do it in New Farm. It's better in New Farm. People are out there walking, jogging, looking at the roses, drinking coffee, having a nice time, meeting their friends, coming in. It's like a library. Brisbane City Council libraries, anybody can walk in there. So this is a big section through the building, just to show on the left-hand side. That was our idea of the building dropping into the thing there. And on the right-hand side, the turbine theatre, that's our idea of movable seats, a bit of the floor moving up and down. It's the pit lift there. And here's the ship moving into the dry dock. Keeping at the same time, keeping the roof down below the parapet level. And there was a fabulous architect worked on this with a guy called Fedor Meluk. And he worked out how to get the structure in there below the level there, how to get all of the lighting bridges in and keep the building clear of the two main walls through there. Opening day, the community did come here and they did like it. This was the build. This is about adaptability, just really quickly. This was the building when it opened, and this is what happened. People want to change things. They wanted to make the turbine platform into another performance space. So we did some drawings, got some money, and turned it into what it is now. There's the crane up above there. The techos get hold of the crane and turn it into a lighting rig, and they move it forward, and they turn this space into a really great performance space. And that's what you've got to do as an architect. You've just got to let the building develop, and you've got to let the people who run the building develop the building. It's got to keep changing. It's got to keep getting better all the time and different. And it's the same with the Powerhouse Theatre. This was on the original time there. It's nice, but it wasn't intimate enough for the actors. So we did another drawing, got some more money, and put the galleries and a balcony in there. And these photographs are taken from the side galleries. This is Powderfinger, and that is packed to the gunnels. This was a really great performance, and people all around the side and in the balcony and looking down there. And then just a word in favour of the techs. These guys are magicians. You've got a space, and it looks like that, and they've got all of these points, they've got all of the PowerPoints, they've got all of the dimmer racks, places for speakers, they've got everything like that, and just like that, they just turn it into another place. This is absolutely, you think, what? Is that the same place? No, it's not. But that's what the techos do for you, and that's why they are the key guys in this place here. And there we go, back to the front. Thanks. I do have my son sitting over there, and he should be doing it. Thanks.
Well, we've gone through a millennia or more of history in an hour, a bit more. I think I've learned a lot. I'm sure we all have. And I think it's fantastic that it's on film, because I can just see this session being used in schools and shown at history societies around Brisbane in the future. And that's the great thing, that there's legacy beyond today with Brisbane Open House. You're welcome to stay for the next session after, of course, you've bought the books out on the River Terrace from our speakers. Basically, we're going to reconfigure this stage for a more of a freewheeling panel discussion in the next session, which will include, I'll be moderating, but we'll have David Hinchliffe and Ed Haysom, the architect, and Norma King-Coy, who is a well-known local and a member of the Historical Society. We're going to talk about the development pressures around New Farm, and are we in danger of being loved to death, and what are the potential futures for this area? So we're going to reconfigure that and come back here shortly. In the meantime, can you please join me in thanking Gaja Kerry, Ray Kerkhove, Gerard Benjamin and Peter Roy.